So I've added in one lesson type called advanced lesson, which costs £25. I'll add two more lesson types, so I'll click on create new lesson type, and we can call this beginner lesson, and we can charge maybe £20 for this. And then we can create another lesson type. We can call this intermediate lesson, and we can charge, let's say, £20 for this too. Or let's say, yeah, £20 is fine. And if we, that should be fine. Now we're going to create a subform within a form. This will be used to enter in any booking details we have for our students. So for this, the first thing we need to do is we click on create, and we can go to form wizard, and we need to select the appropriate fields to take across. So we're going to start off with student, and we can take the basic student details across. So we can take across student ID, student title, student surname, and student full name. That should be okay for student. Then we will select lesson, and from lesson we will select lesson number. Student ID we've already selected from the student table, so we don't need to select this again. However, for this table we will also select instructor ID, date of lesson, start time, length of lesson, meeting point, and lesson type. Now it's important to remember that we need to select instructor ID and lesson type from the lesson table instead of the lesson type and the instructor table, as this may give us issues later on. So then we go to the instructor table. We've already selected our instructor ID previously, so from this all we need to do is select title, surname, full name. That should be okay. And then we can go to lesson type, and again we've already selected lesson type from the lesson table, so we don't need to select this again. However, we will select cost from this table. We can go next, and we can do this by student. So the student details will be at the top, and the rest of the details will be down below in the subform. This is the reason why we have chosen instructor ID and lesson type from the lesson table, because they are entities of the overall booking instead of selecting them from the original tables. We can click next and next again, and we can give our forms appropriate names, or you can leave it as the default values. For now, I'm going to leave it as the default values. You can click on finish, and our form will now be created. We should now be able to fill in the details for our students. So for our first student, we can enter in 1 for the instructor ID. This should then automatically fill in the rest of the details. So for instructor ID 1, we've got Mr. Tom Jones. We can also put in now the date of the lesson. We have got a validation rule on this. If we try put in a past date, it will not allow us to do so. So we have got our error message which comes up here, which says please enter in a future date. So we will do that. For time, we need to make sure we enter in a time between 9 and 7. So if you try and enter in a time of 8 o'clock, it won't let us do so. So we can enter in a time for 9. We can also enter in a lesson type here. However, we'll come back to this point in a minute. We now have our overall sub-form within our student form. What we need to do now is we need to improve the layout slightly. So some of these fields aren't totally visible, so what we can do is we can go to Layout View, and then we can make this field size bigger so we can see what it says at the top. If you wish to decrease this one, we can decrease this one. Title doesn't need to be so big, so we can decrease that one there too. And we can also decrease surname slightly, as well as full name, as well as the cost. So we can just make sure we're saving as we're going along, so we can click on that. Now we can move this slightly to the left as it's too far to the right. So we can right click on Table Student, go to Design View, and we can now drag this slightly over to the left. We can also make it slightly bigger to make sure we fit everything in as much as we can without having to scroll across. We can also rename this if we wish to do so. Let's call it Booking Details. And we can also move this slightly to the left as well. So we'll save this again with this symbol in the top left hand corner, and we'll now switch back to Open View. Now we can see our tables move slightly to the left, and we can see slightly more in our table. We can now enter in some details. So we'll enter in Instructor ID 1. This should automatically enter in the details of the instructor. As you can see, it's done so. We can also enter in the date for the lesson, so we need to make sure it's a future date, as this was our validation rule. If we try and enter in a past date, so for example the 10th of June, it will come up with an error message which says please enter in a future date. So we will do so. Start time needs to be between 9 and 7 o'clock. So if we try and enter in 8 o'clock, it won't let us enter in a time. So we need to enter in 9 o'clock again. For length of lesson, we should type in 1, which is 1 hour. For meeting point, we can type in home address. So we now type in our lesson type, which is intermediate lesson or advanced or beginner. Once we type in the lesson type, it should automatically come up the cost. If it doesn't come up with the cost, either you've misspelt the lesson type or you've worded it incorrectly.